Hello, Barons. Now, not much has changed since we last spoke, other than a Netflix show, LIV, rollback, Ryder Cup issues, John Rahm going on a tear, Rory nailing himself to a cross next to Brandel, a little bit Life of Brian-like. And then Jay said yes to Yasser and flipped everything on its head. And there's no better person to discuss this with than our very special guest and inside man, John from Chicago. Welcome, John Craig from Chicago. How are you going?
Good evening, Philip. It's been way too long, and what an occasion to get back together again.
And I thought the timing was perfect to invite you back for a comeback pod, as it is, not an emergency pod, John, because it was almost 12 months ago where you had dinner with some gentlemen, having just left a meeting, making the statement that fix it, whatever it takes, fix it, when it came to LIV and the PGA Tour. Well done.
It's turned out to be rather prophetic, hasn't
it? So what's going on? And if ever there was as you pointed out in a previous chat, a Donald Rumsfeld moment of we have known knowns, we have the known unknowns, we have the unknown knowns, and we have the unknown unknowns.
And if we were to run a percentage over that, the known knowns are like 0.2%. The known unknowns are about 80%. And the unknown unknowns are surely going to come out from under a rock and fill in the last 20.8 or whatever it is. But, yeah, it's incredible. Incredible. And, you know, we could just take this thing in so many different directions because there are so many amazing – the fact that this deal could get done with the secrecy that it's occurred within such a small group of people. You know, this couldn't happen in a normal corporate world. I mean, just the due diligence and the board approval. And I mean, I have not, and over here in the States, the last 36 hours consuming golf media has just been, I mean, it's insane. I mean, every professional speculator, and I should use that word in inverted commas. Yeah. Every professional speculator, I've got 900 different views of what this actually means. And the bottom line is no one has any idea at this point in time. And I'm not even sure that the five people at the table really know exactly how this – I mean, there's going to have to be some serious negotiation and give and take to create something that can – I mean, there are still some stakeholders to please. Andy Johnson made a really good point today on Shotgun Start. I mean, at the end of the day, the players can walk away from this. I mean, they're not – the PGA Tour is full of freelance contractors. I mean, if half of them walk away, if Rory gets the shits because he doesn't get fairly compensated, we'll get into the detail of that, but it's like, what angle do you want to take? Because this could be a 7-hour podcast with just the two of us. But yeah, no, that's my word of the day is professional speculator.
And I'd like to think that we get into the speculative detail as opposed to the detail, John, because at no stage am I expecting fact to come out of this unless it is a quote from a player or from Jay. But otherwise, the whole thing is speculative. So let me start with a question for you.
Can we actually put that official warning up to listeners?
That's right.
This is speculation. We don't profess to know here. And I don't want to underplay the point, but you know, I worked the phones hard today with NBC, Golf Channel, 2 player agents I'm very close with that manage LIV players. I'm telling you, no one knows. No one knows what exactly and how this is going to play out. So we can speculate with free rein.
And it's a movable feast, but under no circumstances is this the proverbial emergency podcast, which I saw everyone releasing an emergency podcast, because there's no emergency.
No, this is the speculators. I keep coming back to it. We are going to use that word often. The speculation podcast.
So let me ask you this, because terminology apparently has become quite important in terms of even Rory's press conference about I'd rather have them as friends than enemies. So has sports washing become sports laundering? whereby we're no longer just washing it. We're actually managing it through to we're pressing it and we're presenting it very differently. So this whole fallacy that is sports washing, as pointed out in Freakonomics, I think sports laundering now, I think there's a bit more detail than just purely a wash. There's a rinse and an iron.
It's the whole 9 yards. I mean, just think structurally. You're going to have the new entity sitting above and on top of an entity, the DP Tour. We know the PGA Tour as it currently stands, which happens to be a non-profit organisation, and income derived from that organisation will wash up through into the profit organisation. So how's that discussion going to go about salaries, expenses, overhead? And I had one extremely good source. One of the reasonable theories as to what brought the PGA Tour to the table here, and one thing that I know with some certainty is it was the PGA Tour that came to the table here to do a deal. And they needed to do a deal because my understanding is that within the discovery stage of the major litigation on the antitrust stuff, it has been pointed out to the tour that they are in serious trouble and will not win this suit. So if I can take that on face value, if we take it as what we know, I mean, the 601 CE/F corporation that the PGA Tour is, don't quote me on that, but it's something ridiculous. It is America. We do love a label here. A standard not-profit organisation will contribute or flow through about 75% of its income to its charitable endeavours. Yep. It's been reported the PGA Tour, the flip side of that less than 20% of revenue actually finds its way to the charities from the non-profit organisation. So I'm sure if you took a little peek under the trunk, we are here in Chicago, under the bonnet, there's some stuff there that the tour just, and there is absolutely no doubt that the tour strong-handed sponsors, players, when the LIV thing came about, in an antitrust manner that would have been revealed. I mean, that is the educated explanation as to how this has come about in secret, how it has come about so quickly, and because neither party had to do a deal.
Yep.
Right. I mean, for this to happen, one of the parties had to do the deal. Otherwise, it would never have happened because they would have just stood headstrong. And anyone who thinks for a second this deal's about the goodness of professional golf, go and pour yourself a Chardonnay, scull the first one, and then have a sip on the second, because this is nothing about money. Simple, cold, hard money for a whole bunch of different interested shareholders, stakeholders, I should say.
And there was a really nice quote, which I won't misquote, I'll try not to, but from Lawrence Donegan, that he said in a tweet that was part of something he wrote for the McKellar Journal. And this was about Jimmy Dunn, this peacemaker, which we'll touch on a few of the players in a minute, because I think this is all fascinating. And I'm trying to look at this from an Australian, Asian and global scale. But Rory has long moved in those circles where the Jimmy Dunns of the world move. But this is his first lesson in how these guys really operate. They're vicious, sociopathic bastards who will buy a good guy like Rory to make, bury a good guy like Rory to make a buck. It's a really nice summary, exactly what you're saying, of don't think this is for the greater good. There's a lot of people who don't do greater good.
No, you can try and spin this as much as you like, but this is simply about recovery for Jay Monahan personally. I mean, I can't think, and I'm a bit of a study of corporate life and entities and stories and history, and I can't think of an about face where a CEO has survived with it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's almost unimaginable that you can take this CEO's rhetoric or narrative for the last year, a We're all good. I mean, you talk about Python-esque and it only being a flesh wound. I mean, it's so funny. You can only laugh. And then he stands up in his presser and cites, well, any decision or any comment I had to make at the time was only based on the information that I had in front of me. I mean, come on, Leighton. Come on. I mean, that's just pathetic.
So John, did he get stitched a little bit? Sorry, I'm not going to defend Jay at all, but this is the Muppet who should have remained independent. When Jim Nantz gave him the heartfelt 9/11 lead-in, was that a Dorothy Dixer at the Canadian Open, the RBC last year, or whereby they'd actually said, it's time to play this card because we're not winning the other one? And then, or did Jay just couldn't help himself and he got sucked in and this is where we are now?
There is absolutely no doubt that the whole narrative has been 100% orchestrated, that the PGA Tour's PR machine brought in the victims of 9/11.
Yes.
Like, none of that has come about by accident. I mean, that's been a deliberate... They couldn't fight the money. They were losing the battle. And when I say losing the battle, they were losing... They are under threat because what's also become clear is that the PGA Tour could not sustain the financial model of fighting LIV.
Yep.
And I think that's been generally reported that, they could throw money at it for a little while, but it was not sustainable through these elevated events without dramatically increasing income, which hasn't happened. And TV ratings here in the US are poor. So that revenue over time, you've got, we're digressing here a little bit, but the linkage between NBC's deal and the PGA Tour with official world golf ranking and the quality of fields, like, it's just such an entwined web of self-interest and, everyone's got dirty hands this morning. Some dirtier than others, and the poor players that stay, the Justin Thomases of this world, they've got to be waking up saying, "Yeah, being a good guy," and he might not be a good guy, by the way, but I'm sure he thinks he is. Being a good guy just doesn't pay, does it? Isn't that the lesson?
So there's that point of. So we'll deal with Rory. I'll deal with Rory first. So Rory's held a position and he's been unwavered in his position and he's getting caned and laughed at from, to your point, there's what I'll call the LIV zealots who are, I told you so. But if the biggest problem that Rory created for himself was, to quote Malcolm X, I've got more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than someone who comes up like an angel is nothing but a devil. Rory hasn't wavered. And to many respects, Brandel hasn't wavered and Eamon Lynch hasn't wavered. And there's got to be, you have to respect the fact that they've held firm, even including today with Rory in the press conference, saying they're not just going to be welcome back.
Well, and I still hate LIV. I hate LIV and I still hate LIV. Now, I'm sure that wasn't scripted. And, what a pointless expression. No, because at the end of the day, LIV's not going away. It might be reborn in a different form or a different name, or it may not. It might continue to be exactly as it is. I don't think these guys are going to walk away from the $2 billion that they've currently sunk. And without the teams thing, there's no revenue way back. So can you ask the question, is the Crown Prince simply happy to say it's cost me $2 billion to have a seat at the table with corporate America, and I'm happy just to write that off? So that's one of the great big questions that's been debated here in the US. Is that a price that he's willing to pay? Because he now does have, because you've got to remember that, through the PGA Tour, you literally have, and now him being anointed chairman of the new company, he has entree to the absolute top echelons of corporate America, like free open door, open pass. You run through the major PGA Tour sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. Jay's contact book is pretty impressive. So the Prince has now got that in his back pocket. Was that worth $2 billion, or does he want to still get a little bit of that back? So to me, that's one of the known knowns of that question has to be asked, and we're going to know in the next 3 or 4 months when they reveal a schedule for next year as to just how much was the Prince prepared to write off.
And Norman's declared that LIV, as of today, Norman's declared that LIV is here to stay, that they're unwavering, that LIV continues ahead. They're starting to plan for 2025. They're planning for 24. From a selfish point of view, we're looking at Adelaide Adelaide's gone nuts. LIV Adelaide went nuts. The public rounds played, I mean, they scoffed at Grow the Game. The public rounds played in Adelaide in the month following LIV have been the highest they've ever been outside of when people were allowed to go back outside their houses because of COVID. So,
I mean, we can only hope that some of the great things about LIV are maintained and supported by the new ecosystem, because there's no doubt internationally it's been a great windfall for global golf, and it's still very hard for Americans to think outside of North America. But, that has been a great thing. I mean, I read today the shark has a new nickname, the Great White Puppet, because it did not look good that he was unaware of this and the Prince called him 20 minutes prior. I read another article today saying at the end of the day, what's Greg's going to say? I mean, he would not be aware of what's happening with LIV next year. So, of course, he's going to talk about business as usual. And I hope there is that. I mean, we can only hope what comes out of this is a restricted schedule in the US that creates freedom for 10 or 12 great international events spread around the world that become part of, whether that's additive to the PGA Tour, whether that's the LIV team involvement side of things. These are the things that we just don't know, but we hope like hell as a lover and supporter of worldwide professional golf that something global comes out of this. And one would suspect that that's a good chance, given that the chairman of this new entity will have a global focus, you would have to think, if at least not through the Middle East.
Do we think that's realistic, though? And I know, like, we're projecting forward because there's about 85 other points I'd like to go over first. But do we think it's realistic that players who've said, I'm not going there unless you're going to pay me, for example, Australia, I'll come down to Australia, I'd love to defend my title. It's $2 million, but legacy and history and heritage, is really important to me, and as is $2 million. Do we really think that they're going to travel, or do you think that the golf hemisphere continues to be divided from the other hemisphere?
The only way that is ever going to happen is if they are forced to do it. They are not going to do that willingly. But if part of the deal is that LIV coexists with the PGA Tour in some form of carved off, and the teams thing, because the teams thing, I say again, it's the key to revenue. So if that's important, and you also must remember, and again, my source here is a player agent for one of the LIV players, they were promised, it wasn't just the cash up front, it was the long-term net present value of the investment and ownership in the franchise, and a pathway to some sort of career to transition from playing, because a lot of these guys don't want to play into their 50s.
Yep.
I mean, some guys do, they just love it. There's nothing else. They love the life. Others don't want to do that. So, will the new entity just pull the rug under that? Let's hope not. Let's hope that continues, and let's hope that forces then some form of attractive structure that makes these guys jump on a plane. And, there's 10 international events that are just become part and parcel, just like tennis. That, I'm sure the tennis players don't necessarily love the travel down to Australia, but you got to do it. You're not forced to do it, but you have to do it if you want to be taken seriously. And ultimately, that's the culture that's got to be created. Now, initially, it might require some arm twisting and some cash, but if you can create that environment and system, who knows in 10 years' time,
Yes, and LIV created that. And I think that the key thing within that is that travelling internationally to a PGA Tour player, we're talking beyond Mexico, and Canada. Like you need a passport to get into both. So congratulations. But we're talking about getting on a plane and things that take you beyond their comfort zone. So I just want to go into a couple of we're going to go through some players, some executives, and not necessarily winners or losers, plus minuses, however we want to call it, but a little bit of. So those who went, we'll just call it winners and losers. Those who went. So Cam, Phil Brooks, DJ, Sergio.
Have you seen some of the
last 24 hours?
Have you seen some of the GIFs depicting Cam Smith driving back into TPC Sawgrass? And there's a couple of others floating around that are magnificent. You've got to think that they're not going to have to give the money back. They got the money in their pockets. They're contracted. The LIV can't walk away from those contracts. If LIV doesn't exist moving forward, by default, these players then have to be provided a path back to the PGA Tour, or else they have an enormous case against LIV. And while Rory says it's not a merger, it's a freaking merger of the ultimate operating entity that sits over the day-to-day operating entity, be it the DP, the European Tour, or the US Tour, or the Global Tour, or the LIV Tour, or whatever you want to call that side of stuff. So, those guys must be just absolutely feeling unbelievably vindicated. And, if you want to talk about Lefty, he said it. He has maintained a consistent stance that the PGA Tour was a dysfunctional organisation. It needed to be shaken up. It needed they wouldn't, poor old Andy Gardner, I'm sure we'll get to him at one stage, but he must be sitting home saying, well, fucking what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
What did I do wrong? This could have been done with just so much more maturity, less pain, success, would have gained traction faster. It could have been all win-win rather than that there's going to be losers. I mean, you've quoted 4 players on the upside. I mean, let's talk about the PGA Tour loyalists. How are they going to square those guys up?
And that is the flip side. It's not only the ones that were loyal, the ones who just said, don't even make me an offer, I'm not coming, versus the ones who went down the track and said, I'll consider it.
By the way, do you know any of them?
Well, it's speculative.
My intel is that there weren't many that said, don't even make me an offer.
Right.
There's no offer, I won't come. You're talking about a very select group there.
Okay, so Adam Hadwin at no stage was fielding offers from LIV, so if we concede that, right. But then we say on the other side is those who stayed. And so part of this is that, as Rory said, we need to make them whole. Now if we deal with Rory and Tiger, and Tiger, who so far has been silent, but I'm sure he's just trying to digest it, because what's the point in speaking like us when you don't have all the information? It probably sets him apart from us again. But they've got this TGL and Tomorrow Sports. And this is the fascinating thing for me with Rory, if we just deal with Rory first. Stayed loyal, held his line, but took an opportunity with Tiger and his backers to invent this indoor golf league. So Rory's payoff may well not be you stayed loyal, here it is. But at some stage it'll be PIF going, if LIV remains active, and we want a team event on golf courses that remains active, and we can't keep asking these guys to play more golf. I really like Tomorrow Sports. Do they make it vanish, and therefore Tiger and Rory just get another $1 billion check?
There's 20 of these hypotheticals.
Yeah.
I mean,
21.
You also got to ask the question, how relevant is Tiger in all of this? He's not a player anymore.
22. So if we just deal with Rory.
If we just deal with Rory, well, Rory's presser today in Canada was just kind of quite hard to fathom, at a time when he really needed to just shut his mouth to say, I actually don't know. So, you know, how are you going to put these guys back in the room together? How are you going to put, there'll be some spice. Like, if we didn't have animosity before, which, again, my intel is that if you go to the Masters and you go to the PGA, the player groups, by and large, are all good. They're not anymore. I don't know where you saw the reports of Grayson Murray's and Rory's interaction at the player meeting yesterday.
I did. But there was the post-meeting report as well.
Yeah, but, that's what we're talking about now. The bottom, because you remember the PGA Tour, in theory, is a member organisation not in existence to maximise revenue for the top 20 players in the world, but to represent all of those card-carrying members. And it has just absolutely shafted players 70 to 200.
But by the same token, John, it must be in the blood, because the PGA of Australia have done a pretty good job of ignoring LIV players despite standing for all tournament playing professionals around the world, unless you play for LIV. So maybe it's just in the water.
Maybe it is. And, can we bring up the Victorian government and, who staunchly stood loyal with the PGA Tour now, whereas they could have hosted a LIV event and now been in the front seat with no animal, it's all good.
And full credit, John, I know this is a very Australian thing, but to Peter Malinauskas, who's the Premier of South Australia, to actually put his hand up and say, I'm keen, I'll get involved, I'll engage. It's life. We deal with Saudi money every day. We deal with oil every day versus the righteous. Oh no, I'm a PGA guy who's now a PIF guy so where are we? So who is the devil, John? And apparently, if LIV is not PIF, Rory needed to tell Brandy that LIV and PIF weren't the same thing. Who is the devil? Is there a devil? Who's question. The devil?
You know who the devil is? The devil is the man that wins. And he's currently chairman of World Professional Golf. And all of those that took these moral positions, and I'm not trying to advocate an amoral position here, but in a commercial environment, unfortunately, and rightly or wrongly, ultimately the moral position will get steamrolled by rolls of cash if the rolls of cash are sufficient. And that's just what's happened here. Let's not try and trick this any away. This is just a case of cash wins. And the guy with the most cash is sitting atop the tree. And as Phil said, he is the scary motherfucker that... I was quoting Phil Mickelson there, journalistic integrity. That's the guy now running World Professional Golf. But we've also got to keep it realist. It's just professional golf. It's a whole bunch of spoiled kids running out making too much money. None of it matters. We're all going out on Saturday to play in our members round or do what we do or go out with our mates to the local muni and or public course down in Australia. So we can also get a little carried away with this. But if we take it for face value, the guy with the most money won. Well, that's a surprise.
And this is where I love this role, and I don't know anything, and I'm not even going to dive into this person who is Jimmy Dunn, and there's a lot of been said about Jimmy Dunn, and Michael Bamberger wrote a nice piece on Jimmy Dunn, if anyone's interested. But Jimmy Dunn, quote from that piece, I wouldn't want to work for Greg Norman. I like people who are absolutely credible, more worried about fact than sizzle, and are reliable. Followed by Jay Monahan. Anytime I said anything, I said it with the information I had in the moment. And they were two of the five people sitting around the table.
Yeah, people say silly things sometimes. I touched on it earlier. I think Jay Monahan's what do they say? He must have a photo of someone with a pig. It's just incredible. Like, you just can't. He has, as the lead figure of this organisation, his credibility is zero. He cannot be taken at his word for anything, ever. So, how is that tenable? And I also find it a little amazing, and I was talking with a senior exec at NBC today who made the point that, at the end of the day, if Jay had wanted to do the right thing for professional golf, what would have happened yesterday? They would have made this announcement and Jay would have said, look, given where we're now heading, given my historic positions, it's best that I now move on, and the new commissioner of the PGA Tour is X. That's what should have happened. And the heat from this debate would have really cooled down, and they would have had some chance of actually creating a commercial argument to say, this is okay. But I can't believe that he thinks his position's tenable. And sidebar. I had the best warm-up tonight for this podcast. Just purely by coincidence, Rachel and I have been watching Succession, and tonight was the final episode of Succession, and like the ridiculous parallels of people and their egos. Sorry, let's get back on track to the pod.
Okay, so we've dismissed. So we dealt with the players who stayed and the players who went, and we've dealt with Rory, a little bit of the irrelevance of Tiger, and 911J, as he's now called, integrity. Where's Big Keith?
I think Big Keith actually is now coming out a winner.
Go on.
He's done the full circle. He's gone from being pilloried as marginalising his tour as nothing but a feeder tour to now potentially having a seat at the table, at the big table.
Blue glasses, John.
Yeah.
The answer.
Or dumb luck, perhaps. But you got to think that the European Tour will. There's no doubt there's going to be more global golf, or I go back to my very first point. If the Prince is prepared to write off his bill and say that was just the cost of getting my entree into the US top echelon of business, then they're all screwed. All of the LIV people, except for the players and their contracts. And, they are the winners. At the end of the day, contracts with very rich people hold a lot of sway.
So Norman, I'm jumping around because one of the winners, so is Norman a winner out of this? Is GWS.com, is Just a Man Walking His Dog a winner? Is he a break-evener? Because he's being, as you say, he's being pilloried as kind of Muppet Boy loser. Once again, Norman, manages to hit the front of a green and spin it back, and then or block one right into the crowd, pull one left into the water. Not that still hurts.
Well, as a master speculator, one could opine that at the end of the day, Greg's done exactly what Greg was employed and was needed to do, which was be a figurehead that was going to get a lot of publicity, draw a lot of eyeballs to LIV through his stuff. He got the players on board. They got started. But Greg's run his usefulness. But perhaps that was his role. And at the end of the day, I'll tell you one thing. Anything I know about Norman and his business entities, Norman is going to walk away handsomely rewarded. And I think at the end of the day, it's not unreasonable for him to mount the argument to say, yeah, guys, I was part of the catalyst to the change that needed to happen. And at the end of the day, that was my number one argument. I happen to have $100 million in my back pocket to say thanks, so I'm not walking away too badly. So I see Norman coming away as a winner. People will try and knock him down because they've tried to knock Norman down, and I'm not a great one in Norman's camp either, but I think if you just look at it purely clinically, he was a catalyst to this change. I'm sure he's going to get paid very handsomely, his exit won't come cheap. If the Prince wants to say, Greg, it's been great, but it's time to hand the baton over, Greg will say, no problems, Prince, just here's the check. So I think Norman, at the end of the day, played his role.
But this is your point from last year, John, is that, I tell you what, Jay, how about you take a hike, Sharky takes a hike, and we all just get on and play together for oil.
That was the information that I was given, and it's incredible that Jay has, he's lasted this long, but that's not to say that, I think potentially the players might get him. And I think the heat and the pressure and the sustained negative publicity, if the figurehead of your organisation, every time he stands up, which is very rare actually, because he uses his players as his mouthpiece, because, the other general commentary in this market is that it's incredulous that a CEO can be so vanilla and hidden when he needed to be the champion through this difficult period. Yet he's still in his role. But I'll call it the underclass of social media and podcasts here, they want him on a stake. Like, it's been brutal. Shotgun start. Absolutely lambasted Monahan in the last 24 hours. And you can't sustain that ongoing, constant PR coming from a whole bunch of different media.
Potentially. So let's speak of media. So in my mind,
as I said, photos and pigs.
That's right. It's like Mickey Pearson. It's like Coach for anyone who's watched The Gentleman. But so as a clear winner to me from a media point of view, the guy that had every reason to have angst but continued to be balanced, probably because it's his profession, was Alan Shipnuck.
No doubt.
Who just continued to report both sides completely independently.
Probably the only freaking trained journalist among the whole lot of them. And it's a slightly flippant comment, but I think you make a fantastic point. I mean, he ultimately, if they write a history of all of this, and I'm sure they will, I mean, he has been the reasonable voice of both sides. He was one of the first guys that actually gave LIV a reasonable hearing. He went to the events. And he continues to this day. And their podcast yesterday was, if people want to listen to this one, go and give it a Fire Pit Collective a listen, because he's a very balanced voice. Strong opinions, but they're not biased opinions. There's nothing wrong with having an opinion.
Yep.
It's just if your opinion is so one-sided that at the end of the day you become a town crier. So I totally agree. I think Shipnuck can, and again, he was pilloried when the Phil book came out. And it's proven that he's actually played a pretty pivotal role in being one of the few voices to actually give a fair and reasonable opinion of what's actually occurring in professional golf.
And his book will be a cracker. I think Live and Let Die or something, I'm fairly sure it was called that. He obviously is needing to rewrite, as he pointed out the other day, rewrite the last chapter potentially. But I think he's been great. So I want to now go across to the ones who aren't coming out of this so well. And I'm going to start with Kyle Porter. That everyone got played, that Phil, as of today, Phil ran towards the Saudis, whereas the Saudis ran towards the tour. Has anyone exposed their potential employment situation any more than Kyle Porter? Other than no laying up and foreplay, of course.
Yeah, it's... I don't know. Yeah, I've been very... How many listeners have you got in America?
6.
America is a very complex place, and it is full of people full of shit. And the media is no exception here. And there are the media is just full of blatantly biased people here, not just in golf, but it's not the job of the media to take sides. come back to Shipnote. That's why he can hold his head high, that he's done what a true journalist should do, is report, interpret, opine where required, but opine based on reasonable information and providing a balanced point of view. But, a whole bunch of these other people, I mean, how's Brandles will jump from Cole Porter to Brandle because we have to get to Brandle.
Of course we do.
Like, how does he appear on, like, where is his role next year? If LIV becomes part of the formal system, how can Brandle have any role in that? Of providing balanced expert commentary on something that he has simply taken and it's his right to do so, but you just can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
So, that becomes I don't know how that's tenable.
But at least he had a position and he was unwavering in that position, as was, Eamon Lynch.
But there's a consequence isn't there a consequence to taking that position?
Yes, there is, and there needs to be. And I think that will come out. I've got no doubt that'll come out because I can't represent and commentate on a sport that I openly object to. In which case, they're going to need to do a little bit of recruiting. And I think Brad Faxon, in that interaction at the PGA with Brandle, showed that maybe he's next up by being able to say, well, the Ryder Cup is USA versus Europe. Because we've got Eamon Lynch, who I understand his objection, so no issue. Jim Nantz and Rich Lerner then got caught in the whole bristling this live players. I don't know how any of them can now represent golf, represent the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I mean, talking to a senior Golf Channel guy today, they have absolutely no idea how this is going to play out. So, that comes down to, we're contracted to cover PGA Tour for the next 8 years, I think it is. Where's, if LIV come in and LIV are a part of, like the DP Tour and the PGA Tour and LIV events, well, where do the broadcast rights for that sit? They were precluded from even considering it because of the adversarial nature previously. How do they come to the table with that? They have absolutely zero. That has not been worked out. And then fly that right down to then, well, whoever is covering it and whoever is covering. So maybe there actually is, a possibility that Golf Channel continue to cover PGA Tour and only PGA Tour. Brandle can continue to maintain his position because he doesn't comment on another side of professional golf.
His was a money source issue, though, not a competitive issue. So that's the challenge.
But then again, if Brandle's only opining on what happened on the PGA Tour this week, because that's Golf Channel's focus, because CW Network continue to be the principal broadcaster of, maybe that is tenable. It sounds pretty ridiculous, but again, we are master speculators.
That's right.
We are nothing but.
I know nothing about the legal system in North America, or in fact the legal system in Australia, as has been pointed out a number of times. But are you allowed to sell your soul to someone who is going to win a court case just to make it go away? And will the Department of Justice have a say?
Well, that has come out in the news today. So the next chapter that hasn't even come to light yet now is that anti-Saudi people who have a voice in Congress are now starting to bring the attention to say, whoa, hang on one second. We might need to have a look at this. So that's another dimension that no one knows. Well, how in the hell will that work out if Congress gets involved and has a right to then look at and continue the antitrust side of things? Because if you thought there was a strong antitrust argument from LIV against the PGA Tour. Now that LIV and the PGA Tour are combined to totally monopolise golf, if Andy Gardner wants to write a business plan and get it up tomorrow and start a case, he's probably going to have a pretty good one.
I still love the irony of it being called antitrust, given all the things that's gone on.
So we're nearly in the days of anti-antitrust.
Anti-antitrust, because we want to touch on Andy Gardner just quickly before we get on to all the other significant issues that I've got. If there is anti-Saudi sentiment on the PGA Tour, and if enough players are thinking, yeah, maybe, and if he's still got the backing and there's enough of them that are good, what would stop Andy saying, still sitting here with a model, Rory? History and heritage?
No, unfortunately, what Andy ran over a black cat several years ago because the top players are going to get the cash. The top players from the PGA Tour. The LIV guys are already looked after, so they're going to go basically where the structure goes. The Spieth, Thomas, Rory, Morikawa, Rahm, there's no doubt they're going to get looked after and squared up here. So without those guys, there is, it's a lovely idea. Let's start a rival league to challenge the rival league that just merged with the historic league.
Because golf needs disruption, John.
Yeah, I think it's probably been disrupted enough at this point. And remember, it's not golf. Golf hasn't been disrupted. Golf is still fantastic.
Yes.
Golf is still, as an industry and a sport, probably never seen better times. And, was a winner of the COVID lottery. But, this shenanigans going on in professional golf, let's keep it in perspective. It's just a bunch of whole rich kids and their egos and a whole bunch of really rich freaking people, trying to work out who's got the biggest member at the table, because that's all it is. And come back to my earlier point. The guy who won, have a guess who won? The guy with the most money. Surprise, surprise. And he'll be a very balanced chairman.
Yes, he and Jay looked like they'd known each other for a long time. In fact, in that interview, he's kind of...
So you'd love to be in that board meeting when the Prince says, who's going to take the Prince on? And say, I don't think that's a good idea, Prince. We're not going to do that. And the Prince looks at you. He's got his 2 henchmen standing behind you.
It will be the dictator again. It's Sacha Baron Cohen and the dictator, where it's just that look up and that little smiling nod of just, and it's all over. Sorry, that's flippant, because I think there's also a lot.
But it's not flippant. It's actually the reality, because he's writing the checks they're going to. Yeah. What's become clear is the PGA Tour have realised they don't have the cash to run this operation to compete, so they've had to merge. And who have they merged with? The guy who's got the cash. So anyone who thinks, and listening to some of these numbskulls today talking about this is a huge victory for the PGA Tour, are some of the most naive commercial people, because what will make this work is the Prince's cash. And the Prince's cash will be spent at the discretion of the Prince, like it can be withheld at the discretion of the Prince. So which argument around the boardroom table is going to win?
So will Jay, as implied by Kyle Porter or Denial Porter and a number of others, will Jay be the first CEO in history that a chairman reports to the CEO?
There's absolutely no chance of that. No, it's just absolute nonsense. And then they can talk about it that, but the PGA Tour will still have a majority of the board. So terrific. The board can vote against the Prince. So the Prince says, that's okay. I'm going to divert my money. Like it's better than Coke. This guy is providing the fuel that will keep all these greedy, grubby, little spoiled brats at the top of the PGA Tour and all the guys making their 20, 30, 40, 50 million, where do you think where's the crack coming from? It's coming from the Prince. So the Prince will deal crack when and where it suits his purpose.
So in many respects,
anyone who wants to argue against that is very naive, in my opinion, from a commercial business perspective, because 12 months later, something's happened that they said wasn't going to happen. And it's only happened because of the cash. So imagine when he's at the table, what's it going to be like?
So I'm seeing Jerry and George sitting in the table at the meeting with NBC pitching Seinfeld. When the guy says, I can see Jerry and Elaine getting together. And George says, yeah, no, I don't think so. Or we can not do the show altogether. Yeah, I think they're a perfect match. I mean, it is as straightforward as that, isn't it?
Exactly, because, he controls the purse strings, because it's just, these elevated events, what's become clear is that, you come back to our opening question. What brought the PGA Tour and PIF together? One of them needed to do a deal. And it is implausible to think that the Prince needed to do a deal. Now, he might have been the one argument is that he didn't want to go through the discovery in the antitrust suit. So he might have had some motivation. But in all probability, the greater motivation was the weaker financial partner who was at the risk of great exposure and who was digging into reserves, was running a non-profit that was going to become more and more into question. Who wanted to be at the table, Phil?
Yeah. No, I think that's reasonable. So it's time for some genuine speculation, John.
Oh, what we've been talking. We've been talking fact.
That was all fact up until this point. LIV, here to stay, and for how long?
It may not be called LIV, but I will back the money every time. And the prospect of big money and monetizing professional golf lies in the team's structure. And there's no way that LIV are just going to hand that to the PGA Tour and walk away.
Okay, so LIV then, let's say LIV embrace the NBA draft style, and all of a sudden the top 48 players, top 72 players in the world on the table for LIV, because it's your time to get paid. Gents, can LIV continue to operate as LIV, but with this injection of 8 events that are team events with, we have just got the pick of the crop? And Jed Morgan, it's time to become a really good real estate agent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reality of it. But, Jed, you got money you were never going to get. You can't complain. I mean, those bottom guys got a windfall. The only guys that within LIV who are completely secure are the marquee players that got significant contracts regardless, and guaranteed contracts. Now, the other guys were really well rewarded. I mean, I don't think a Jed Morgan can have a possible complaint. It was his choice.
Yep.
He's earned pretty good coin, and I'm sure if you analyse what he's earned, whether disappointed or not, out of LIV, I think it would be significantly more what he's earned out of his prior playing career. But, it comes back to, I mean, who's to say a new structure doesn't play the PGA Tour from January through to the British Open in a mix of traditional 72-hole and maybe a bit of match play, but principally traditional PGA Tour product. The whole tour then moves for the next 8 weeks to the team's event, played all around the world, featuring the best players from LIV and the PGA Tour. And you have your LIV 12 teams, because I think you can do 16 teams in the shotgun start. Someone mentioned that to me. So the PGA Tour bring in 4, and they play 8 weeks of that. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that break the monotony of, so to hell with the FedEx Cup. because the Prince will say, FedEx, it's been nice, but the 200 million you've been putting in, I'm just putting in 400 and thanks. And I'm not saying that's happened. This is
yes,
crystal ball speculation, but it would be cool. And then you have these fantastic 8 events around the world of individual and teams competition featuring the best from LIV and the PGA Tour. And that's what 40 weeks of golf looks like.
You've got professional Andy Gardner there, John.
But he's been right all along.
Yes, I know. This is the point. So the next one, dealing in my region, and believe it or not, anyone listening in North America, there's an area called Asia and the Asia Pacific, and we play a bit of golf down here and have known to do a bit of good work in our time. The Asian Tour, where does this leave the Asian Tour, do you think? None of us know anything. The Asian Tour have released a statement saying we welcome the joining and we look forward to seeing how it evolves. But do PIF want to own global golf, or is PGA Tour and the Northern Hemisphere enough for them?
I'm not privy to the corporate structure of PIF. However, my understanding is that PIF bought the Asian Tour. PIF owned the Asian Tour. So if you have Company A that now merges with Company B and C, being the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, and Company A also owns Company D, being the Asian Tour, somehow, some way that will fall into, and again would be implausible, or again, the Prince just says, I'm happy to write off that 200 million or 50 million or whatever we paid for that. I'm happy to write that off. But people don't necessarily, it's unusual for people just to give away money when there's a role and potentially a viable business there. So it's going to fit into the system somewhere. Goodness knows how. But unless, as I said, the Prince just wants to write off 2 billion.
So therefore, from Australia, the selfish Australia, New Zealand, because I'll include our Kiwi brothers and sisters, do we see more events in the next 3 years here than we have? Do we see just one big event? Because obviously the President's Cup's dead. There's speculation. Do we see the same number of events or less events?
I think it would be unlikely to see more events because your second key stakeholder is Europe, so they're going to get first pick. How many events are going to be played outside the US? 10, 12? Well, that there's going to be at least 4. So just divide the number up around the world. So, I don't think it's implausible that there's 2 events in Australia just to manage the travel.
Yep.
But I wouldn't be putting the house on it. And anyone who thinks that the PGA Tour, I saw Clates put a comment on Twitter to somebody today, gave him a bit of a backhander about, don't get too excited about more events in Australia. The PGA Tour aren't coming down here. And he's right, because as I said earlier, the only way the players are going to come down here is if they are forced to. So find a structure that means the players have to play these 4 majors, 12 legacy events in the US is 16, and 8 international rebranded LIV events. There's 24. Well, that's maxed out the majority of the best players. So spread 8 events around the world, 4 in the European Tour, leaves 4 left for South Africa, Asia, Australia. I think I'd be betting on Australia keeping 1. Sad to say it, and I think it's terrible and it's sad, but I think that's just the commercial reality of where, again, just follow the money.
Corn Ferry Tour co-sanctioned, John, PGA type event. But LIV Adelaide, I suppose everyone's hope, our biggest uncertainty, and Norman's declared it safe, that LIV Adelaide, as long as that goes on, we'll deal with it because we've been treated like crap forever. What does it mean for the rollback plans, John? Because obviously we've skipped a little bit of information over the last 11 months. Do you think this strengthens the position to say you can roll back whatever you want? It is a local rule under PIF that we'll do whatever we want.
I think this is irrelevant to rollback because I think what will make rollback successful, rollback's going to happen. The USGA and the governing bodies are committed to doing it, right? And they sit independently of any of this nonsense going on. The four majors, so who will decide about rollback will be the Masters, the R&A, the PGA, and the USGA.
Yeah, the four families, yeah.
They control rollback because there is no way in hell players are turning up to the four majors with a ball they've never played before. That's not going to happen.
Good point.
So distill it all down to that, and maybe it all comes down to what Big Fred says. And if Fred says you're going to play the rollback ball if you want to play the Masters, the guy's going to play two events leading up with the ball to try and get used to it, to understand it. It's not easy to switch between. I'll never forget, because we've been through this. So I caddied for this American guy at the 91 Australian Open at Victoria Golf Club, right? His name was Richard Raymond, I think. He was a tool. He didn't pay me in the end. Anyway, so we're on the 16th at Victoria. He's got to finish par to make the cut. 1,690-yard par 3, southwesterly wind, so almost straight into it, about 25 mile per hour. He's played the big ball all day the prior day. Doesn't think he can get 3-iron to the green. Switches to the small ball. Absolutely hits the most beautiful shot you've ever seen. Just absolutely flags it, and it ends up on the 17th tee. We did not make the cut. It is not that easy to switch between balls.
Yep.
And that's an anecdotal story of one, but it's the God's honest truth. It broke my heart to me.
A caddying name drop's pretty good, John. Here's a speculator for you. Given that there doesn't seem like there's anything that oil can't buy, and we look at Ronaldo and Benzema in our soccer, Newcastle United in soccer.
Did you see what Messi reportedly's knocked back in the last 24 hours?
Yeah.
Like 1.6 billion or something.
He really likes Miami. What can I say? Maybe this explains, and this is completely irrelevant, but maybe it explains the push for renewable energy, John, because it's about balance of power. And so if oil is everything, we cede control.
Well, let's go back to the actual objective. And forget about sports washing.
Thank you.
It's got nothing to do with sports washing and PR and image, because you can't fix someone's image. You can't polish a turd, right? A turd's just going to be a turd.
I've tried.
But what you can do is transition your economy over 40 to 50 years from one dependent on oil dollars to creating a tourist destination, global travel hub. And that's ultimately, I believe, the prince's and Saudi's goal here. And this is and bringing corporate America to the Arabian Peninsula. And because they know oil's screwed long term. So, it's been, I think, somewhat superficial to think, the sports washing argument is a very narrow one. I think the Saudis are very smart and ultimately realise that we've got to transition our economy and our country and our region to one that people want to come to, because we've got nothing else. We can't make shit. We don't have people to manufacture. So we got to get entwined into a whole bunch of new revenue streams outside oil, because you'd be a fool to be betting on oil's long-term sustainability if you take a 50-year view.
And remember, John, it's not sports washing, it's sports laundering. We've made that important distinction.
Yeah. I think it's just business.
Yeah, that's right. It's life. So give me some predictions. So just Give me some predictions. How do things look in 12 months' time? Tell me who's running things. What's the landscape in 12 months' time?
All right. Jay's gone. Number one. And whoever it is, they just need a fresh voice and leadership.
Yep.
I think LIV will be rebranded to something more avuncular to the PGA Tour, and what LIV will now be will be the teams part of the PGA Tour. So call it what you like, PGA Tour teams, because I'm not very smart. That was the first one that came to mind. PGA Tour TT, and there is a part of the schedule carved out for these teams event because they've proven to be really popular. Even in America, like the Zurich, and they're still popular and they're still well watched on TV as a break from the traditional 72-hole stroke play individual events.
Yeah. Yep.
So it would be, commercial reality ultimately prevails. TV networks want entertaining product. They've got a seat at the table. They'll be pushing for it. Again, I'm biased because I like the idea, but I think that would be, if ultimately it's about creating a better product for 40 weeks of the year, reducing the 72-hole stroke play traditional PGA Tour schedule, building in a LIV component, the majors, that's a reborn professional golf environment or structure that the three stakeholders have got to work out, well, how do we make that happen? Because that would be pretty cool.
Your next
we could just read Andy Gardner's business plan and say, let's do that.
It would be quicker than doing a podcast. Champions Tour. Does anything happen to it? Stays the same, unstructured, restructured?
So it will get restructured. You would have to have thought it would get restructured. You can't help but think at some point in time, because it's not a particularly profitable business for the PGA Tour. It's a legacy thank you to their members. How strong is the commercial push from the controlling body? So let's go back to the corporate structure. The new overriding body is a for-profit organisation sitting above the PGA Tour who reports to it. And they're going to be saying, we want cash. Hang on, you're spending all this money propping up this tour for these friggin' old buggers that, as a legacy to your old non-profit structure, we have a responsibility to our shareholders. That's got to go. Now, that's a speculation, but again, follow the money. A for-profit organisation is just not going to allow a subsidiary who happens to be a non-profit organisation to suck their cash dry. How's that going to run?
Makes complete sense, John. Makes complete sense, and I think that's the quandary that everyone's got. But you know what? We're 36 hours into the new world of professional golf, not golf. To your point, a number of times, we're in a new world in professional golf, and I think it's just going to be fascinating to see what happens.
It will be, and I think it'd be terribly sad if the Champions Tour either went away or got significantly downsized. I think that would be sad, but equally, it's you can't be half pregnant. You can't say we want to monetize professional golf. We want to maximize the return for our players, for our corporate partners. Oh yeah, but we just want to do this little non-profitable shit on the side. It's not how the world works. So I think it would be difficult looking to the medium 3 to 5 years that the Champions Tour or any non-profitable pathway to the PGA Tour continues to receive financial or extensive financial support from a for-profit organisation.
So what you're saying is it's about time these non-profits started making profit and earning their keep, which I think is a fantastic way, John, to close a podcast that was speculative, that's been 11 months in the making. And John, I appreciate you joining us, John Craig from Tour Edge Golf, and I hope business is well. I didn't even bother to ask you about Tour Edge.
Well, to all your listeners down there, some fantastic new product. You just pop down to Drummond Golf, and I'm sure they'll look after you. But no, Phil, it's been way too long. We keep saying it that we've got to do it more regularly, and time and life gets in the way. But it's always fun. It's lovely to chat. We appreciate anyone out there who's willing to listen to our speculations. We hope it was in some way entertaining, and it's great to have the chance to have a chat.
And in the interest of self-promotion, you can now catch Golf Barons seasons 1 through 4 on 9 now in Australia, free to air, and coming soon to golfnation.com in North America with a big announcement ahead of us. But until next time, Barons, to quote Life of Brian, always look on the bright side of life.